Today we have something a little bit different on the Manufacturing Leaders podcast. Looking after your employees' mental and physical health has never been more important, both from an ethical standpoint and also the fact it has a direct correlation to improved retention and recruitment. Ollie Bell is a Workplace and Wellbeing Specialist. I was over the moon to get the chance to talk to him on today's episode. He's driven by reducing sickness and absence and genuinely making a difference to the community. In this episode, we go deep into the problems particularly men face with poor mental health and increasing male suicide rates. 2/3 of suicide are men. The most affected age bracket is 50 to 54, and North East has the worst suicide rates across the full UK. This simply cannot be ignored. Ollie takes us through exactly what companies can do today to start making a difference. Please subscribe to the channel, but also like and share the episode to make sure we get this very, very important message out. Hope you enjoy the episode. Excellent. So a bit of a different episode on the podcast today, and I'm going to let Oliver introduce himself and what he does. So firstly, welcome Oliver to the podcast. If you don't mind letting us all know who you are, what you do, that would be superb, please, buddy.
Absolutely, yeah, no problem. So my name's Ollie Bell. I suppose I am a workplace wellbeing trainer and consultant, and specialising mainly in industries that are predominantly male orientated, so recruit mainly men. So yeah, I come into workplaces that probably don't have a team of workplace wellbeing specialists. They probably have maybe a couple of HR people. They might have a small kind of operational team who often don't have the capacity to be able to support the well-being of some of the workplace despite them wanting to. So yeah, I come in and help understand people, or help people to understand, I suppose, how you might go around supporting people's well-being throughout the spectrum of well-being, all the way from kind of general awareness raising and stuff which makes people feel good, all the way through to that clinical stuff where people need to reach out and get some clinical intervention.
Yeah, nice. And I think this is so well timed because, you know, if you look at recruitment, if you look at manufacturing recruitment for the last 12 months in particular, the employee engagement piece, both recruitment and retention, has never been more important. Yeah. There's never been more sort of volatile, if you like. So I think it's so important now the businesses are looking at what they can do because, you know, the obvious issue right now has been salary and shortage of people. Yeah. So what can you do? You can only control what you can. And I think digging really deep into the people and why people want to work there and why people want to start there. But that comes from actually looking after your people. Yeah. And I think going quite deep. So have you found that when you've been going to businesses that you've seen some difference?
100%, yeah, and I completely agree with what you said. In that, I suppose the recruitment, the talent pool is getting smaller and smaller, and especially in the northeast of England where we're based, or where I'm based, the talent pool is quite small, and you'll find employers competing over that talent, and some might offer workplace perks such as I don't know, Nando's vouchers, whatever these workplace perks might look like, which are great. And on the surface of things, people might warm to those sorts of stuff. But from a kind of psychological point of view, and I put the disclaimer in, I'm not a psychologist, but I have a little bit of background with this sort of stuff. These extrinsic, they call them, these rewards, which are there to give kind of satisfaction or immediate kind of pleasure, as opposed to joy and happiness, is kind of short-lived, and it sort of makes sense. Like if we were to, I don't know, eat a nice snack, then you're going to feel good for 10, 20 minutes or so. But beyond that, are you going to have happiness and joy in your life? And what I do is try and help workplaces provide that reward, that benefit of workplace benefits, which is more intrinsic. It's the stuff which make you feel good. It's the stuff that make you feel comfortable and make you feel respected and heard and valued. And they're the sorts of things that people are probably more warm to going towards now, as opposed to just being a number, just being a bum on a seat and just kind of being dispensable or disposable. People want a workplace who cares for them.
Yeah, and I've seen the shift. I think manufacturing particularly is quite, you know, if you look at quite a unionized, old school environment typically, and you're right, it is predominantly male. And I think certain businesses will have a culture where this stuff almost used to be, maybe still is in some industries, a bit fluffy. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't need that. But it is so important. I mean, I've you know, we're probably we're now probably 60-40 girls to sort of male, female to male here. But I would say everyone post-COVID. I've never had to deal with so many mental health issues in terms of that side to it, and which on one hand is worrying. On the other hand, I'm really pleased about, because it just means for us that they can trust us to have those conversations. I mean, have you seen a shift towards people struggling and also talking about things now?
I don't think I've seen a shift towards more and more people struggling, but certainly more and more people being more comfortable to openly talk about it.
Yeah.
And that's because we're now beginning to develop a culture and environments where people feel like they won't be judged if they do talk about it. And I think historically, especially looking at the UK, and again, kind of focusing in the Northeast, like, we do have this culture of stiff upper lip, and to have a mental health issue or to experience low mood or anxiety or depression is thought of as a weakness.
Yeah.
And that, you could argue, stems from the days when men, again, were the breadwinners of the family. And if you didn't go to work, then your family didn't eat. And if you weren't going to work because you didn't feel great today, or that you had low mood or something that somebody couldn't visibly see, then that wouldn't have been accepted. Like, you're only allowed to go to work if you're missing a limb, would have been the kind of the excuse of taking a sick day. So the pressures of that would have added to this cultural opinion that to discuss mental ill health would be a weakness. But I think whether or not mental illness has been prevalent within our society, whether or not we've seen people or cases who are experiencing mental ill health, I'd argue that it's always been a thing. I mean, I'm not a historian, so sorry about my dates, but in the 1940s, we were at the back of a war where we had hundreds of thousands of people returning from seeing some really quite horrific things. You telling me that none of those people went through mental ill health? Mm-hmm. So it's certainly always been a thing. I just think that we're developing a nice culture and a society where people feel more comfortable to come into work and say, you know what, I'm not feeling great today. And that's what I want to do. That's what I want to help workplaces with, because it's not always comfortable for people to do, but equally, it's certainly not rocket science for people to do either. Like, I think once you do develop these workplaces where people are okay at coming in and saying, is it okay if I take a sick day today? We're developing a place where, instead of that person reaching, I suppose, it's often called like breaking point, or the bit where somebody has to take prolonged periods of sick leave to recover from a mental ill health. If we can intervene, if we can capture that, if we can prevent that from happening by offering people 1, 2, 3, 4 days of sickness so where they can take a break and they can relax a little bit more, or we provide the services to put them in place so that they can go and speak to a counsellor and help to address some of those low levels of anxiety and depression, then we're able to prevent that long-term sickness in the long run. So it is around culture and around awareness, and that whole piece around making people feel comfortable and not like they're not judged if they were to come into work and tell you that these are the things that are going on in their life.
It's interesting. Yesterday, I was doing some research. There's 3 stats that shocked me, actually. The 2/3 of suicides of men, mm-hmm. So only 1/3 of women. Northeast has got the worst rates in the UK, so yep. It's the worst place for it. And actually, what probably surprised me the most was the highest suicide rate age was 50 to 54 men. And actually, that surprised me, because I kind of, maybe it's the ones you only hear about, but sadly, the amount of sort of 30-year-old men I hear, and unfortunately known a couple that have lost the battle with that. Mm-hmm. You don't always hear about the ones at a 50, 54, which that surprised me, actually.
Yeah, I think what we've been sort of fed from media campaigns, really, really powerful media campaigns, by the way. I'm not dismissing them whatsoever, because the job of media campaigns which raise awareness of suicide prevention are to do that, to prevent suicide. So, but a lot of the time we hear the statistic that suicide is the biggest killer of men under, I think it's like 35. Again, I'm not great with numbers and dates, but that's the statistic that we hear a lot. So me, who sits within that bracket, I sit under that umbrella now. The biggest risk to my life, sat here speaking to you right now, is me. Yeah. And that's considering all illnesses, all accidents, all of the other things, big, bad, scary things that we have in the world, which we fearful would take our lives. I would be the biggest risk to that. So that's one of the biggest shocking statistics for me. But it also adds that confusion when we look at, I suppose, the numbers of people who are dying. If you've got that on one axis and you've got age on the other, it peaks at the age of 50 to 55. And again, we could probably pick that a little bit further and go, is this a group of men, because we're talking about men here, aren't we? Really, is that a group of men who come from a generation where discussing mental ill health is still frowned upon or isn't accepted, and people would feel judged to describe or to discuss some of the thoughts and beliefs that they might have in their head? Is it also a period of a man's life where the family are starting to grow up? So they might have had their kids at 30, 35, and those kids are now fled in the nest, and now all of a sudden they're coming back to an empty house where there's a lack of purpose sometimes. And those sorts of things, both cultural stigmas and a lack of purpose, putting that into a cocktail is really, really dangerous, and probably why that's driving those statistics. And equally in the northeast of England, I mean, not only do we have the highest suicidal rates, but we've also got, I believe, the highest levels of poverty within the UK. We've got, we come at the top of the list for things like cardiovascular disease and health profiles and things like that. And again, that could probably stem from our industrial past and having a high amount of mining and shipbuilding in the northeast. It could also come down to whether or not we've the funding in the northeast compared to other parts of the world. I'm not too sure. It's open for debate, isn't it? But it is sad. But I think conversations like these go a long way at trying to address those statistics and reach out to those people who might be listening to this, who maybe do have had beliefs of suicide, which are common, by the way. Like thoughts of people taking their own life is a common thing to have. And what we don't want to have is a society where people would feel victimized or thought down of if they did have those thoughts. It was something that really sat with me years and years ago, which I think is really important to this conversation, which is mental illness, suicide, and addictions are the only illnesses that we blame people for. So when people die from suicide or when people are addicted to drugs, like, we blame that individual. Well, that's your choice. You're the one who made that decision. Well, they're illnesses. Like, people are poorly. And you would never say to another poorly person with cancer or with heart illness or any other physical complication that it's their fault. So why do we do it for mental ill health? And I think that's something that we really need to address and reach out to those people who are having suicidal thoughts to be able to tell them that the support's available. Please speak to somebody if you are having those thoughts and get the help you need.
Yeah, that's great. It's really, you're so right. It's so interesting, but it is, isn't it? Because when I saw that age bracket, same as you, I kind of thought it probably is because that category of men still aren't talking about the problems, because I guess we've nailed it, but we are so much better between, your early 30s, late 20s at talking. You know, we've got a WhatsApp group called Theo James Men where we go out every couple of months and have some food and just not talk about work. But I think, are our dad's ages and so on, are they talking about it? Probably not, because when they were our age, they didn't, and that's probably the missing gap. And like you say, all those pressures you talked about, they mount up, and then they haven't got the support network that they have. I think I saw something the day that societies like Italy and places have reduced levels because they're culturally they have so many more social. The social impact has the biggest impact on your mental health rather than anything else, because you're around people and it's even for your brain, the stimulation, that side to it. So it's fascinating, isn't it?
It is, and there's a couple of really interesting theories around men and masculinities as well, and the risk points of a man's life when it comes to mental ill health. And I think they peak at around 30 and at around 65, and that's because at 30 men tend to settle down, we tend to have children, we tend to realize that we're not young and can't do what we want anymore, which is sad. But that bringing of children into the world reduces your social circle, because you can no longer go out and take part in the football or the darts or the pub or whatever it is that you do to interact. And then at the other side of the spectrum, you've 65, where men are beginning to retire. And the removal from the labour market also means that you, again, may lose that purpose. You may no longer be the breadwinner. And that might be something that you hold as a value to what it means to be a man within your life. So to have that removed brings the risks of that values being lost. But equally, removing yourself from the labour market also removes yourself from the social circles that you would have built within the workplace too. So they're two kind of peaks, and it's interesting to see why those peaks may exist. And social circles and so having social support and social networks is really important. But I think what we often forget as well, or what's often brought a lot of concern when it comes to socializing or going back to that point of suicide is people not only also some people might feel quite reserved or quite cautious or quite scared about talking about suicidal thoughts. But equally, we've got people who are really apprehensive about having that conversation with somebody who is having suicidal thoughts. Like I get a lot as a trainer, I get a lot of people go, I just don't know what to say. I don't know what to do if somebody were to tell me. And I think some real key takeaways. First of all, there's loads of training out there. If people want to access free training, there's a half-hour course called Zero Suicide Prevention by the Zero Suicide Alliance. It's online, it's dead accessible, it's really, really easy to do. But some of the real key takeaways from that are, if you have a gut feeling that you think somebody's at risk of taking their own life, now they might have been in extreme periods of low mood for a prolonged period of time, they might start to be putting their affairs in order, they might be starting to say goodbye. You might just have a lot of red flags where you go, this is something not right here. It's good practice to ask the person clearly and directly, are you having thoughts about suicide? Don't shy away from the word. Don't stigmatize the word. Don't just put that word in a cupboard. Don't say things like, you're not thinking of doing something stupid, are you? Because if I was thinking about taking my own life, you've just told me that's a stupid idea. So I'm probably not going to tell you it. So yeah, using the word suicide clearly and directly is good practice. And then if that person responds with, yeah, I am, we need to get that person help. Now that help could be the Samaritans, 116 123. That's the Samaritans helpline. Just give them a call. It might be the police if you're in an emergency and this person's really at risk now, but we need to get that person some help. If this person isn't feeling suicidal, but they are experiencing a lot of low mood, just listen. A lot of the time, we don't need answers. In fact, how often have you and I had a conversation with somebody when we've had a really tough day and we come home and we want to tell that person something, and that person's turned around and told us all the solutions to our problems, and we go, I did not need to hear the solutions. I know the solution to my problems. I just need to vent. I just need to speak to somebody about them. So don't worry about trying to solve problems. Don't sit there thinking I need to come up with an answer for this person's issue. Your role is there to just listen and ask that person more and more questions. Well, why do you think that? Why do you feel this way? Have you thought about how you could make things better? Would you like me to help you try and make things better? They're open conversations, open questions, which would be far more powerful than, why don't you just leave your partner? Why don't you just get a new job? Oh, great, thanks. Didn't think about that. So yeah, I think there's two sides of a conversation. It's the person who wants to have the conversation. It's the person who's listening in the conversation.
Brilliant. There's that. Why do you do what you do you think? Why is it a passion for you?
It might have come across. I'm quite passionate about this.
Yeah.
It's not only am I interested in it, not only do I see quite selfishly, I see huge benefits from going out there and working with people and seeing the improvements that they make within their lives. And I'm not saying like a cure mental illness whatsoever, but just giving people the opportunity to have these conversations can be really, really powerful. And that gives me an internal value. It makes me feel really good. But beyond that, beyond a kind of like personal reason as to why I do it, I know it's needed. Like we've just been talking about the statistics in the Northeast, and we've been talking about why those statistics exist. Now, what I come in and do within workplaces, as I mentioned before, isn't rocket science. But a lot of the time you need somebody to give you some of the ideas. You need somebody to orchestrate it and to lead it a little bit, and to give businesses tools which they can use at a later date and they can keep using over a prolonged period of time without my intervention. So that's why I do what I do, is because I care about it, because it's needed, and because at the end of the day, it's not overly difficult for people to do. And when they do it, the rewards and the benefits and the impact that you can see after integrating things like a wellbeing strategy or wellbeing activities or whatever it might be are huge, and they can make a real difference to people's lives.
Apologies for interrupting this podcast for a very quick 30-second pitch of my business. Theo James are a specialist manufacturing and engineering recruitment search firm based in Seaham in the Northeast. If you're looking for any staff or a new opportunity yourself, from a semi-skilled level right the way up to C-suite executive, then please get in touch. We have a specialist consultant in each discipline ready to help. I'm extremely proud of what we've built over the years, and I'd love to extend that service out to you. Thank you. Enjoy the podcast. What would you say if you envisage, let's say, you walk into an automotive manufacturer tomorrow, which is, 500 strong. So, SME still, probably the larger size. Perhaps you've never done anything like this before. You've got people on the board which are a little bit unsure, but they see it as something they should do.
Yeah.
What are what the first steps you take to change maybe hearts and minds to some extent and put things in place which are going to last forever, I guess, which I guess is the goal for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I often think of this as kind of like a spectrum of what I could come in and do. And the reason why I think it's important to explain that is because instead of coming in and going, these are all the things you do, which can be really overwhelming, and sometimes people have not got the physical capacity to deal with it. Sometimes there are financial constraints to doing these sorts of things. What I think is far more beneficial is going, let's start off by doing these. Let's see how they land, and then we'll progress and we'll build upon that, and we'll build through this spectrum. I think your initial steps are to speak to people, like create well-being groups where you get a group of people who more likely or more often than not will already be really engaged and really passionate about supporting other people's well-being. Get them in a room, get them around a table and go, what is it that we should focus on? Give me your ideas. Tell me the gaps in the workplace which you think we could really add value to when it comes to well-being. That tends to direct the rest of kind of what you do. However, humans are humans, and I'll be very, very surprised if I ever came across something that I hadn't heard before, because we all know, we all have the same reasons as to our drivers and the things that make us happy and the things that make us sad. They're all very, very similar. But yeah, that would probably be one of my first steps, is recruiting. I often call them like wellbeing ambassadors, who are people who can be placed across the workplace, who work with individuals who we might never be able to reach, especially as like a core central team. If we're talking about a manufacturing company of 500 strong, it'll be really difficult for me in a central position to speak to all of those 500. But if I can recruit 20 people who can go out and speak to another, again, I'm not a mathematician, my maths is going to fall, I'm going to be weak here, 20, 25 people? I don't know. They go out and they go and speak to some people in the peripheries of the industry, and they can, or the organization, they can tell them about the wellbeing activities and events that are occurring, and they can feed back to the central team and go, these are the interests, these are the people, these are the things people want to do. I think once you've created that group, we can begin to do things like jump on board of national awareness raising days and integrate like a wellbeing calendar within the workplace, which again isn't overly complicated. You can get external providers to come in and do speaks and talks or workshops or activities around themes, around particular health related themes. Now, in the past, we've focused a lot on mental ill health, on about stress, on about resilience and bounce back. In my eyes, we're tending to see more and more work around things such as the menopause, because I know we've focused so far on men in the workplace, but people who go through the menopause are a growing group of people within the workplace. And a large percentage of those will leave the workplace because of their symptoms associated with the menopause. Now, again, leaning on stigma and the reasons why we don't talk about menopause in society is because we have stigmatized it in the past. Now, every single person who's been through the menstrual cycle will go through the menopause. That is a fact. So that's 51% of the population. So we should probably be talking about this quite big thing in people's lives. So doing educational awareness, raising events and things like that, and activities would work really well. Training is something that people love. I deliver mental health first aid training, which is designed by Mental Health First Aid England. I can come in and do that training. It's a 2-day course. It gives people the skills to recognize the signs and symptoms of poor mental health and know what to do on a first aiders basis, as opposed to kind of the psychology basis. You wouldn't be a psychologist or a diagnostician or a clinician. You would be a first aider. You'd be the first point of contact for that person. I can see mental health first aiders, a network of mental health first aiders, and one that's quite well organized, being really, really powerful at being able to, again, capture those people before some of those sicknesses arise at a later date, and put those safety nets in place for those people when they need it. And then line manager training is something which, again, people are really keen on doing. I think from my experience, line managers often are either promoted into positions because they're really skilled or talented at what they do. They're not always great at people, which is a skill within itself, which is fine. And that's what we're here to do. That's what I'm here to do. That's what other professionals in the area are there to do. And managers often have a lack of confidence, and they don't know when to ask the questions. What can I say? What can't I say? Are HR gonna tell me off if I say this or this? Like, now, the majority of the time, they're not. HR aren't going to tell you off unless you kind of do cross the border, and HR will tell you about that. But the majority of the time, the line manager just needs the confidence to be able to ask questions and give managers discretion. That's something that managers struggle with, is applying managers discretion a lot of the time as well. And then I suppose the peak of what I could come in and do is establish often what they're called as EAPs, employee assistance programs, which many workplaces have. However, your smaller workplaces often think that it's for big corporate organizations, and they're certainly not. And an employee assistance program, they're offered by loads of big companies like AXA or Bupa or Virgin Health or Health Assured. They're big companies that have 24/7 helplines that people can contact, and they either give citizens advice, like information, or they give mental health support. And that mental health support often comes in the form of structured counselling. And from experience, it is not beyond the possibility of financial possibility for a lot of organizations. It's actually really quite cost effective. Now, integrating things like that, any of those, and packaging that up and putting that into a tool or putting that into some kind of benefit, not only tells your people that you care about them, and this is evidence that I care about you, but it also helps, again, going back to that talent pool, it helps us attract more talent, because that talent who are looking through job adverts might see things such as your Nando's vouchers, or it might see like your gym accounts, or it might see, oh, hang on a minute, they've got a full well-being strategy and a well-being service in place, which tells me that this employer cares about me. Mm-hmm. And going back to the drivers of humans, what drives us? Well, we're far more driven to work for somebody who cares about us, as opposed to somebody who pays us a little bit more and doesn't care about us and treats us like rubbish.
Yeah, and I think people leave positions because they're unhappy and they're not valued, typically, for multiple. That's probably the biggest reason. And I think if someone has that type of community and they get used to that support network, to leave that would be a big thing. So I think the retention piece is probably massive. I love what you say there, and actually I'll pick up on the in terms of talking about issues with stigmas, like you say, like the menopause. It's really interesting because I've started to see a bit of a shift of companies now starting to present to their staff on these sort of topics, and actually that topic to men as well, because and I think I watched a documentary about it, and it just opened my eyes so much. No one tells us about this. I had no idea about it. No idea. I had no idea how much of a struggle it is, and a huge struggle for some people. Life changing, and that's the sort of stuff that I think it's important for women, but it's probably more important for men to be aware of it, and then to be a support network for the mother, the wife, the sister, whoever it is. So I think that sort of stuff to talk about is massive for businesses who, let's go the opposite end, small business, perhaps want to have someone like yourself come in, and that's maybe on the roadmap, but actually initially want to go, right, what can we do ourselves? What would you recommend the first sort of two or three things they can implement today to help get
I would certainly recruit a team of ambassadors and wellbeing people. I think that's just so easy to do. In my experience, it's often an email that says, listen, we want to do something wellbeing related. Who's interested? Now, again, going back to statistics, 1 in 4 people within society will experience stress, anxiety, or depression within the next year, which probably means, and that's reported, and that's people who have been diagnosed. Yeah. When you send that email saying who wants to take part, you will capture a percentage of that 1 in 4. You'll also capture a percentage of the 3 in 4 who have loved ones or who have family members who've been through mental ill health before, or who've experienced health-related issues. And they'll come forward and they'll go, I'm really passionate about this sort of stuff, and I want to help. I want to help the other people who I work with. Now, doing something as simple as recruiting that group and getting them around a table and really giving them, I suppose, not being really strict with the roles, but being clear with the roles. Like, we don't just want you to kind of pick and choose when you can be a wellbeing ambassador or not. What we want you to do is help drive this and help build the activities and the events and the fun and the fun stuff that we can do in the workplace. Like, we need you to not just tell us which things we should focus on, but also to broadcast those things, to market those things, to get people to come along. Like, that's sort of your role as a wellbeing advocate or a wellbeing ambassador. I think that can be really easy. I think doing stuff such as, I want to say, awareness raising events and activities. So things like bringing external partners in to come and do talks on health related topics can go quite a long way. I think sometimes businesses need to be really careful with what they choose to focus on, because sometimes it can become quite tokenistic. So say, for example, we do start to focus on mental ill health, and we just do it as a kind of flash in the pan, right? On Tuesday, we're going to have a speaker come in and talk about mental ill health, and then we're not going to discuss it ever again, or for the next year. Like, it can come across as somebody who doesn't really care about it. They've just spent a couple £100 on an external partner to come in, and that'll fix all of our issues. So we've got to be sometimes quite careful when we get external providers to come in, not because of the quality of the external providers, but because of how that might be perceived by the wider workforce. Like, is it tokenistic? Now, to try and account for that, being open and being honest and saying, listen, we want to build a wellbeing strategy. We want to build like a wellbeing roadmap. Help us build it. Get wellbeing advocates to build it. Do some surveys or some Microsoft Forms or whatever it is that you use, just to collect some data to say, what does wellbeing mean to you? How can we help you in your wellbeing in the workplace? Those sorts of questions. And there's loads and loads of resources online on how to build these wellbeing strategies and how to go out there and do that. But once you've got that's something that you can fall back on when you might get criticism, to say, well, what's the point in doing a stress awareness day on Tuesday when you don't really care about this stuff? You can go, well, we do, because we've got this strategy and we've got this roadmap that says we appreciate that we're not where we want to be, but this is how we're going to get there. So that sort of stuff can begin to be formed. And then beyond that, as I say, it would be dead easy to get trainers in and people to come in, people like myself who can come in and do those sorts of training programs to help upskill people's awareness and make people a little bit more switched on when it comes to mental ill health or other health related topics.
Excellent. And where can people find you? It's the best way to get in contact.
Probably best way, reach out on LinkedIn. So it's just Oliver Bell, and there's a picture of somebody who looks like me that pops up. Reach out on LinkedIn. I'll be more than happy to have a chat and go through how I might be able to help people.
Yeah, great. I'll share your details, mate. But look, it's been superb, Ollie, and I think this is sort of stuff that people need to be talking about and have shied away from for many years. And as we said, the stats are scary, and the stats aren't going to change unless something changes. And I think, for workplaces to start to do something is crucial, because, like you say, they're not just helping their staff, they're helping their staff's families, and all it comes, and just giving people the tools to do that, I think, is life-changing. So look, thank you very much. I think what you're doing is powerful and brilliant, and no doubt massively helping people's lives. So I really appreciate you coming on today.
No, thank you very much for having me. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks, mate.